Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Elie Honig back with us again. We'll chat with Elie in just a little bit. First, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So given the news this week, I decided that we're going to change things up a little and start off with the weekly rant. So let's talk about this Charlie Kirk assassination. And this is really, for the most part, all I really want to say about this tragedy that occurred on Wednesday in Utah. It's safe to say that politically, I disagreed with him on everything. I also believed him to be a very divisive and dangerous fringe right-wing influencer. But Charlie Kirk was first and foremost a human being. He was a husband and father to 2 young children. Charlie Kirk did not deserve to die. Just like all the other Americans who did not deserve to die at the hands of cold-blooded murderers in this growing epidemic of gun violence. These include politicians, movie and concert goers, those praying in a church or a synagogue, or little children and their teachers in school. And speaking of schools, Kirk's assassination overshadowed yet another school shooting that same day, this time in a Colorado high school. I have murder in my family. My late wife was brutally murdered. I hate murder, and I hate murderers, especially those deranged monsters who see it as a justifiable response to political or any other differences. Like a lot of people, I had hoped that Kirk's shocking death would not be politicized. But unfortunately, the United States president and other Republicans already have done just that, drawing conclusions as to who's to blame before the assassin had even been caught and his identity and motives revealed. That is truly a shame. And now that the suspect has just been apprehended, we will likely soon learn who he is, what his social media postings have been about, who he may have supported politically, which party affiliation he has, if any, and other critical details which may reveal his motives for this assassination. But until then, I hope people can just stop the divisive, dangerous rhetoric, including and especially Trump. The political temperature in this country right now is at inferno levels and must be brought down, or we will, unfortunately, continue to see more and more violence like this. And after deadly shootings like this, there's the requisite hope that this time just might be the inflection point that finally inspires our elected leaders in Washington to act to address this violent epidemic. But I am not holding my breath. Until then, I really don't want to hear people say, this is not who we are. Because it's exactly who we are and who we've become. But those in power, and we the people who elect them, can change all that. So perhaps one day we can truly be who we think we are and who we'd like to be. That's it for me. What about you guys? Any thoughts on this week?
I think you summed it up well. Obviously, political violence is not acceptable because it just leads to more political violence, and we're seeing that now. I think the obviously unfortunate thing about this is that we have a president who is going to fuel this and is going to weaponize it. And everyone in the conservative media machine, from Jesse Waters to Steve Bannon, they're all taking advantage of this as if it were an opportunity to pile on and cause more violence.
Yeah. Yesterday, Congresswoman Nancy Mace was like, he was a tranny or pro-tranny. Dude hadn't even been arrested yet. They had no idea who he was. Right. Like, that is just, it's unconscionable. And it's dangerous. That's the shit that really needs to stop. Look, I'm a Democrat. If it turns out that this assassin has a history of pro-Democrat, pro-liberal support, I will be the first to say I condemn his actions, I condemn his ideology, and anything attached to it. Unfortunately, we don't get that from the other side.
No, we don't. Well, there are 2 issues. There is no bipartisanship when something happens to a Democrat, and that's disgusting. It's equally disgusting that this man lost his life, and it's really not going to shine a light on gun violence and possible common sense gun laws. And it's really disturbing and scary.
Yeah, I just wish we can get back to a place where, damn it, if somebody gets murdered, we're all just collectively angry. And look, we had assassinations not that long ago in Minnesota. I mean, there was not much outcry from the right. I think to this day, Donald Trump has still not even acknowledged it. And when he had been asked at the time if he's going to call Governor Tim Walz, he was like, I don't like that guy. Why should I call that guy? Well, maybe because you're the president of the United States and we just had a national tragedy.
And Governor Shapiro?
Right. When his house was set afire. Like, we can't live in a society where some people are above the law. We can't live in a society where murder's okay if it's somebody not on my team. Like, it's insanity. We see what's happened this week. You haven't seen this be politicized by Democrats. You've seen Democrats come out with compassion, with sadness, and a hope that we can move forward in this country and stop this violence.
Yeah, I think we do have to separate out leadership from just random people on the internet, because what we've seen is all of the leadership of the Democratic Party has come out and said the right thing about what happened with Charlie Kirk. Mm-hmm. Then you will see the other side point to random liberals, let's just say, or people leaning left on the internet who have said things which were not right. But there's going to be people on the internet saying all sorts of things. I want to see the leadership of the Republican Party say the right thing, and not simply random people on the internet, because that's always going to be the case. Who cares?
Well, when you have the president of the United States, just a few hours after the assassination, post a video, which was his classic dark dystopian blame game. It's the radical, crazy left-wing lunatics, and we're going to take them down. We had no idea who the killer was. That's just partisan, dangerous rhetoric. You know, that office should be, and traditionally has been, the consoler in chief in a time of national tragedy like this. Mm-hmm. And instead, we're getting a Trump rally. So that's not going to change.
Nope. They're going to take advantage and they're going to weaponize it. There's already a website to track down, and they've already posted hundreds of people's social media accounts along with where they work who have said unfortunate things about, being happy that Charlie was killed, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine, you can find random people on the internet that says anything.
Yeah. Let's move on to a real existential crisis for Trump, and that is the Jeffrey Epstein shitstorm. Several things continue to happen that make this scandal intensify, not go away, as he and the Republican Party has been hoping for 2 months now. This week, we saw the release by Bloomberg of hundreds of newly discovered emails between Epstein and Maxwell. She had been on record pretty much downplaying her relationship. I didn't really know him that well. We weren't that tight. I didn't know what's going on. Though this sexual stuff. What sexual abuse? Basically, that was her position. Well, now we know that she was heavily involved in his business dealings. They talked about a company they were both invested in. They discussed a fertility procedure they might go through together. Long after she has claimed that she had disassociated herself from him. So the timing of that is bizarre. They discussed discrediting the women who accused him of sexual abuse. There's also a spreadsheet that showed over 2,000 gifts totaling $1.8 million, including lingerie to teenage girls who ultimately accused him of sexual abuse. Think about that for a second. All of this places further doubt as to her credibility because it contradicts her prior statements and the limited nature of their relationship, according to her, and the overall timing of their relationship. Also, Maxwell has maintained over the years that she didn't know the details of Epstein's initial sexual abuse case in the mid-2000s, but these emails demonstrate that she did, in fact, have extensive knowledge of Epstein's legal problems. And it shows her role in helping him strategize how to deal with it. There was also a cryptic email exchange between Epstein and Maxwell where he told her to, quote, remove Trump from a list of high-powered people Maxwell sent Epstein shortly after he was indicted in 2006. And I say cryptic because there really isn't any info on why he said that. But why else would he say it? Also this week, the British government fired Peter Mendelsohn, its ambassador to Washington, after they discovered newly published emails and other correspondence, which illustrated a very close relationship to Epstein. And the Wall Street Journal also doubled down on its story about the birthday book. We have Representative Thomas Massey's discharge position, which now needs just one more vote in the House to force a floor vote on his bipartisan legislation to release the full Epstein files. And that's because there was a special election down in Virginia Tuesday night, and the newly sworn in victor, Democratic Representative James Walkinshaw, he signed the position late Wednesday. So it's just one more vote. See, this is going to be the interesting thing. Will there be one fucking Republican who says, yeah, you know what? I sat and listened to those survivors a couple of weeks ago at that press conference. What harrowing, horrific stories they told. Of course we should release these files and get to the bottom of this shit. No.
Yes. Yes. It's going to happen.
It's what's going to happen.
I think one Republican is going to defect. Yes.
That would be great.
No, I'm feeling really optimistic.
But look what happened
that.
in the Senate on Wednesday. They blocked Chuck Schumer's attempt to compel the release of the Epstein files. Interestingly, though, Rand Paul, not so much a surprise, but Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley voted with Democrats. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it was a strict partisan vote. But what I don't understand is how can you watch that press conference and see so many women, as well as everything else you know about this situation, and go, nope, I'm not going to vote for that. Because what you're then saying, here's the thing, folks. Here's your Republican Party today. You are either for the rape of teenage girls or you're against it. And if you're in Congress, there's very simple ways you show that. The biggest way is how you vote. So if there's a vote to release files, which can ultimately lead to accountability of these perverts, these monsters, and you vote against it, well, then you are for the rape of teenage girls. I don't give a shit what you say, how you deny, how you deflect. Vote for the fucking bill, or else you're for the rape of teenage girls. This is the problem, though, for them. The survivors are not going away.
So anyone who listens to this knows my disdain for Susan Collins. Like, she makes me so angry. But I'm going to save my special disdain today for Mitch McConnell. I mean,
what exactly are you referring to about Mitch McConnell?
I mean, he's not running. He's old as sin, and like he could go out. And I mean, everything he's done up to this point has been horrible. But somebody would say, you know what? He actually cares about the institution. He cares about women. There's like a kernel of a human inside there.
No.
But
No,
I mean,
there is not.
There's not even
that's my
half a kernel.
fantasy.
He's kernelless. He's completely kernelless.
I have no confidence that they will vote for anything that makes sense. They took an oath to uphold the Constitution when they became members of the House, and they've already violated that oath over and over again. They've been perfectly happy allowing USAID to be completely demolished against any constitutional requirements that they are supposed to adhere to be the keepers of the purse. And yet we know that potentially 25 million people are going to die because of that. So childhood rape or 25 million people dying, they're perfectly happy to go to sleep at night causing incredible harm to the world.
Well, before we move on, here's my suggestion. Again, I've made this many times, to MAGA. Okay, think about this. Ask yourself the following question. After years of telling you that Washington is full of rich, powerful, baby blood drinking, child grooming, sexual perverts who are part of a deep state cabal that has been mired in a cover-up for years to prevent you and us from learning about who has raped teenage girls. They are now telling you they don't want to find out who these people are. They're telling you there's no there. The president is telling you it's a Democrat hoax. Now, at the same time that he and everybody around him claims that he is innocent, he is not incriminated in any way in these Epstein files, even though his name appears many, many times. So we have the promise of all these years. I'm going to take down the deep state. I'm not part of it. I'm not guilty. And if you elect me and put Congress in the hands of Republicans, we are going to take these fuckers down. And guess what? You did that. You gave him the White House. You gave him Congress. And this allegedly innocent man who now has all the power in the world to deliver on that promise, for some reason, isn't. Ask yourselves why. Let's move on to the winners and losers.
My loser, Senate Republicans for setting in motion the nuclear option to break a Democratic blockade of Trump's nominees, weakening Congress's vetting role. My winner, E. Jean Carroll, whose $83 million judgment against Trump was upheld in court.
My winner on Thursday, Brazil's Supreme Court accomplished what U.S. institutions were unable to achieve, holding a former president accountable for undermining the democratic process. My loser is Jamie Dimon, who's been president of J.P. Morgan Chase since about 2005 and somehow took almost 2 decades to turn over Epstein's financial records, even though Chase's own internal compliance flagged close to 5,000 transactions as suspicious activities as early as 2002.
My loser is highly unqualified FBI Director Kash Patel. His screw-ups in the Charlie Kirk investigation and manhunt is just the latest example of his gross incompetence, which is eroding the public's confidence and trust in the agency. My winners, Brian Driscoll Jr., Stephen Jensen, and Spencer Evans, 3 former top FBI officials who filed a lawsuit against Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi, accusing them of illegally firing them in the agency's massive purge of agents and officials as part of Trump's retribution campaign against those who worked on the January 6th and other investigations into Donald Trump. All right, let's get to Elie Honig. He is CNN's senior legal analyst. He previously worked for 14 years as a federal and state prosecutor. He is also the national best-selling author of 2 books, Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department, and Untouchable, How Powerful People Get Away with It. He writes a weekly column for New York Magazine and for Cafe.com, and he hosts 2 podcasts for Vox Media. He teaches at Rutgers University and is special counsel to New Jersey law firm Lowenstein Sandler. His new book, When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President from Nixon to Trump, will be published and available September 16th, this coming Tuesday. Elie, welcome back into the back room.
Andy, I'm happy to be with you as always. You sent me my 5 timers robe, an actual people. He actually did this. I joked that like Saturday Night Live, when someone is on 5 times, they get their fancy 5 timers robe. I do have in my home, I'm not home right now, an actual 5 timers Andy Ostroy robe. I think I'm at 10 now. I don't think you have to you can send me a new patch, not a full new robe. How about that?
Well, what we're doing now is we're sending people 10-time Teslers.
What does that mean?
You know how Trump, when he said the Tesla.
Tesla, I got you. I like it.
We'll send you a 10-time Tesla.
You can send me one.
I'll take it. So we have breaking news literally this morning as we were getting this thing together. I want to ask you about that. And that is the arrest of the Charlie Kirk assassin. What thoughts do you have on all of this? Because it's been a crazy week.
Well, thank God they caught this guy. Let's start with that. It looks like the case is strong against him. I am certain he will be charged with first-degree murder in Utah. He probably will be charged with federal crimes as well. What a heartbreaking week. Disturbing almost beyond description to see what happened to Charlie Kirk. The man was he was targeted because of his political speech. Like, there's no way around that, because the things he said, this shooter didn't like, and that is a very scary thing to me.
Yeah. And we saw how this case has been handled this week. It started with FBI Director Kash Patel rushing to say, we got him, and we don't got him, we got him, we don't
embarrassing.
Got him.
Yeah.
And then this morning, Donald Trump was on Fox and made the announcement that the caught the assassin. How unusual, in your experience, having worked at the Southern District of New York,
Yeah.
how unusual is it, A, for Patel to do some of the things he's done this week, like jump to social media to make that announcement, get on a plane and fly and like take over a local case, as well as having the United States president make an announcement before the FBI director or the governor or local officials out there?
Well, Kash Patel doesn't know what he's doing. And you could see that we're not talking about the announcement where they actually got the guy. You're talking about a separate one the day before where he wrongly said they had a person of interest or a subject in custody and then very quickly had to walk it back. I mean, no experienced law enforcement officer or agent would post something like that unless you were 100% darn sure. And to have to walk it back, I promise you, every FBI agent, actual FBI cop, was groaning and slapping their heads that he did that. With the president, I'm trying to think, have we ever sort of gotten first word of a huge arrest from a president? I can't think of any. I mean, it's possible. If we think back to some of the high profile cases, I don't know. I can't think of any. But, look, I said on air earlier, that will become emotion. I promise you that this individual, this defendant, will say that the commentary made by the president and others has tainted the jury pool against me. It's really hard to win those. I don't think it jeopardizes the case, but it's going to be emotion that the defense will make. Look, they're going to need something to say. So I think it's really unusual that Donald Trump made that announcement. Frankly, I can understand why he would have done that, given that he's close to the person. But prosecutors probably don't love it, but I don't think it's going to sidetrack their case or anything.
Yeah, it just makes you wonder how any of this would have gone down had it been the liberal equivalent of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. Let's hope we never find out either way on any of that. Yeah.
But the politicization of it it needs to, the whole temperature in this country needs to be turned down. But some of the actions these last few days are not helping that. So you have a new book coming out next week on Tuesday the 16th. It's called When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President from Nixon to Trump. Congrats on the book. I'm sure it's going to be another New York Times bestseller like your first books. This is your third. It's a truly unique subject. So tell us about the book and why this particular part of our judicial history made you want to write about it.
So thank you for that, Andy, first of all. And I think I've come to speak with you about all three. So you get the triple crown for this. Like my children, I love.
Wait. Do I get a bathrobe then?
Oh, actually, yeah. I owe you a 3-timer. You're right. It's coming your way. I will send you an autograph.
I get like a washcloth at least.
I love all my books equally, but I will say this one was the most fun to put together and to write because in this book, I have first-person on-record interviews with, I think it's 36 or 37 was the final number, of people who lived these cases. Watergate prosecutors, people on both sides of the Clinton-Ken Starr case, Iran-Contra prosecutor or a prosecutor, people from the Mueller team, people who defended Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Hunter Biden. I mean, you name it. FBI agents, White House officials, and it was challenging, getting all these people to speak to me, but they did. Again, nobody's anonymous in this book. Everyone puts their name on their quotes. And it was remarkable. It brought me back to being a prosecutor and the strategy and the back and forth between the defense and the prosecution, but also with the overlay of the politics. You have White House officials weighing in, you have Congress getting involved in these cases. And the reason I wanted to do this book, Andy, is because these are the biggest, most important cases of our modern history, from Watergate to all the cases I just mentioned. And I think they do tell us something about ourselves and our system more broadly as well, in addition to the sort of fun, crazy stories that are in there.
Yeah, and you went back 50 years, and I'm sure you uncovered and learned a lot about how structurally, fundamentally, these administrations and their departments of justice and their attorneys general and their special counsel investigations all differ. How do all of those administrations compare to what we're experiencing now?
What we are seeing now from Donald Trump in his second term, and I argue this at the end of the book, is fundamentally different than anything we've seen before. And I include Trump 1 in that what we've seen before. I mean, what we're seeing now is even different from that. And the interesting thing, when you step back and get this broader historical perspective, is there are a lot of consistent through lines from Watergate, but even before Watergate, by the way. I mean, the first president to appoint a special counsel was Ulysses S. Grant. And by the way, guess what? He ended up firing that special counsel. Unfortunately, all the participants in that case have passed, so I wasn't able to speak with any of them. But let's look at it from Watergate on. Not every president from Nixon on, but many presidents from Nixon on have, to varying extents, tried to undermine, derail, push back against, and at times obstruct these special counsel investigations. The two worst perpetrators before Trump 2.0 were Richard Nixon himself and Trump 1.0. But what Trump is doing now is just fundamentally different, because Trump isn't even doing the old thing of, let me undermine this guy, let me try to sort of end run these things, let me assert privileges, let me fight this in the courts and in the media. What Trump and Pam Bondi are doing right now is that they have said there will be none of that. I mean, they haven't said these exact words, but they've made entirely clear there will be no special counsel looking at Donald Trump or anyone around him. DOJ will not be doing anything that the president doesn't like. And more to the point, and this gets to sort of the title of the book, we will be seeking retribution on anyone who ever came after us. The expression is, when you come at the king, you best not miss. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we have seen now is a break from the past. And by the way, look at Trump 1.0. Like I say in the book, in retrospect, it's a miracle that Mueller happened. It's a miracle. Donald Trump's own Justice Department was the ones that put in place Robert Mueller, and Trump hated it. And we remember him undermining and obstructing and complaining about Mueller virtually every day, but he didn't end it. He didn't fire Mueller. He sort of tried at one point, which I talk about in the book, but he let, by and large, Mueller, put out his report and testified in Congress, and they indicted Manafort and Stone and all those guys. So none of that would happen now. So we're at a very different place.
Yeah. Well, it started with Jeff Sessions as his attorney general.
Recusing,
and he had,
yep.
Went to eventually Barr. And he had the kind of pushback, the refusal to cross a legal line, that we just don't see today.
Yeah.
His attorney general today is literally, I mean, every time I watch her, it's like she's an employee of Trump org. That's the way I look at it.
She's completely compromised. She's completely political. She makes no effort to hide it. And it's not just who they are going about. We can talk about this, but the retributive efforts that have been launched at Letitia James, Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, on the Obama intelligence apparatus. But also, I argue in the book, we had a really telling moment early on in this administration that Bondi was not going to do anything that might upset Trump or interfere with the administration. And that's when the Signal scandal broke, right? When we learned that Mike Waltz and J.D. Vance and others were communicating on Signal about specific military attack plans. And I said at the time, I wrote in a piece for New York Magazine, this will be a moment where we get a tell. Is she for real or not? And 3 days later, after having done no investigation, Pam Bondi came out and said something like, this was not classified information, and everyone should just be applauding the success of the military strike and not worrying about this. Well, look, there's precedent for this. And I say this in the book. Anytime we've had a question about handling of classified information, it's resulted in a minimum of a serious investigation and a maximum of indictments. I mean, Hillary Clinton went through the email investigation. Joe Biden had a special counsel, Robert Hur. Donald Trump had a special counsel and an indictment, all for mishandling classified information. But now, the Signal scandal hits, and they don't even do an investigation. They don't even try. They don't even pretend. They just say, no, we're not doing anything. And who's going to make us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned Biden. It should not be lost on anyone that his own son, Hunter Biden, was not only investigated, but indicted on his watch. Imagine that happening today.
Well, Biden has a really interesting legacy and record when it comes to these things. And I talked to both Abby Lowell, who represented Hunter Biden on the record, and Bob Bauer, who represented Joe Biden. They were both great. And Joe Biden, on the one hand, has this, nobody has ever tolerated special counsel like this guy has. I mean, when Biden takes over, he's got the John Durham case still going, right? And, this is the guy who, right after Mueller, the guy with the goatee who was like, revenge, investigate the investigators. And that chapter doesn't go well for John Durham in this book. I mean, it was a complete flop. John Durham ends up indicting 3 people. One of them pleads guilty and gets probation. The other 2 go to trial and both get not guilty verdicts. I actually interviewed one of those people who beat John Durham in the book. It's a great chapter. But Biden inherits this, and he doesn't interfere with it at all. He lets it go another 2 years till the natural end. He then is the president when special counsel is appointed to investigate Donald Trump, his primary opponent. Joe Biden himself and Joe Biden's son. And by and large, Joe Biden never made any public statements undermining those investigations. There is reporting by Bob Woodward, which I quote in the book, that Biden was furious at Merrick Garland for allowing some of those appointments. And Biden, I do think, undermined his legacy in the end when he not only pardoned Hunter Biden, but did it after he swore many times he would not. And he didn't justify the pardon by saying it was a stupid case or, I just am taking mercy or whatever. He lashed out politically. He said Hunter Biden was being politically targeted. So I think Biden ends up with a mixed legacy on this.
Now, you mentioned Lowell and Bauer. Who are some of the other prominent key central figures in the cases that you interviewed for the book?
I loved speaking with Abbe Lowell because he was Hunter Biden's lawyer. And I'll just say he unleashes in this book on the Hunter Biden investigation, even with some profanity, which Abby's good at. Bob Bauer was measured, but very critical of Robert Hur in some ways, but was defended Robert Hur. He said, I don't think Robert Hur had political motives. I just think he lost his sense of where he was going. I spoke to Donald Trump's legal team. I spoke to John Lauro, who was not surprisingly very critical of Jack Smith. I spoke to several members of the Mueller investigative, not Bob Mueller himself, but several members of his team. I spoke with David Kendall, who still to this day represents Bill and Hillary Clinton, Lanny Brewer, who was a White House official. I spoke to a member of Ken Starr's number two, essentially. Ken Starr passed away a few years ago. Mm-hmm. People from the Iran-Contra team. Two of my favorite interviews were the Watergate prosecutor. So Jill Wine-Banks, who I'm sure you know, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Your
she's
listener,
on this podcast.
Right. I mean, she's a legend, and she was 30 at the time and gave me great. In fact, I opened the book with Jill, someone I deeply admire. Jim Quarles, who I love. Jim Quarles was a 26-year-old on the Watergate team and then a you can do the math year-old on the Mueller team. And one of my favorite lines in the book is Jim said to me, in retrospect, I was too young for Watergate and too old for Mueller. But they both told me what it was like inside that office on the Sunday morning after the massacre, right? They both got called back and there's great stories, but I'll boil it down. They don't know whether they've been fired. They know Archibald Cox is out. They know the AG and deputy AG have resigned. They're, trying to figure out what to do. And Archie Cox comes in and says to them, I'm paraphrasing, but the quote's in the book, basically, you keep on doing your work. Don't give him what he wants. And they did. And because of that, we got the Supreme Court opinion and the tapes and the resignation. So they're real heroes in this whole thing.
And getting back to the title for a second, it sort of implies or suggests that it is intended for our current king wannabe, but it is broader than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it goes two ways. First of all, it certainly applies to what's happening now with Donald Trump, retribution, right? It comes just so people know. Omar, who's the character on The Wire, which is one of the greatest TV shows ever, famously has a moment where he says, you come at the king, you best not miss. Now, that expression or some variation of it goes back hundreds of years, although in my mind, Omar invented it. But again, as I say in the book, it goes back to Machiavelli and others. So it does come back to that, retributive sense. But more broadly, Andy, as you said, talking to these people, I realized that they understood that this was a death match, a political and personal and legal death match, that every one of them understood, even if they had a bit part, this would be the biggest thing they ever did in their professional lives, that when they died, it would be in their obituary someday. And so, look, I was a prosecutor doing regular, heated cases at times against gangsters and all. So I know what it feels like. It feels like your life is on the line. But when it's these cases and you have the additional overlay of politics and you're being scrutinized for everything you do, it's even more intense. And so I think the title captures that as well.
And what is the genesis of the special counsel system?
So there's really three eras. There's what I call the Wild West era, which is everything up to and through Watergate. There was no rules. I talked to John Dean, who you probably know, Andy, but has, become a friend of mine. And John said to me, it was improv. Like there was no regs. There was no, here's how you do it. But they intuitively understood when you have a case that is dealing with the president or some big shot in the administration, you need some outsider. And by the way, that goes back, like I said, to Ulysses S. Grant, Harry Truman. There were various presidents over history who understood, we're going to need an outsider for this. No rules, though. After Watergate, then we get to our second era. They passed the independent counsel law in the late 70s. That stays on the book until 99. And that gives us, that is the regime throughout, most famously, Ken Starr and Clinton, but also other cases, Mike Espy, who you may remember was the Secretary of Agriculture, who was prosecuted and acquitted. I talked to Espy for the book. He's great. There was 20 of those actually overall, but the big one was Ken Starr and Clinton. Because of the disaster of the Ken Starr case, everyone agrees, both sides. Bob Dole and George Mitchell alike write an op-ed saying, time to let this law die. It died in 99 at sunset. And then since 99, we've had these regulations. And there have only been 6 cases under the modern special counsel regulations. One of them was the Scooter Libby case, although technically that wasn't even technically within the regs. But the other 5 have all been in the last few years. We've had this glut. We had Mueller, Durham, we had Hur, we had the Hunter Biden case, David Weiss, and then we had Jack Smith. So it's this historical anomaly that in a 6-year stretch, we had 5 of these cases. I don't think we'll ever see that again.
And now some folks get confused by the terms independent counsel and special counsel. What's the difference?
It's almost intentionally confusing the way they've done it. But basically, it was independent prosecutor for Watergate. That's just what they chose to call it. Under the 70s to 90s era, they were called independent counsel, although the name changed once or twice. I won't even say because it gets too confusing. Now they're called special counsel. So the rules and nuances are different in ways that are important, but they all fundamentally have the same job.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how successful, I mean, you mentioned all the cases that you researched and wrote about, but how successful typically are independent investigations? Do they typically achieve real accountability?
No, I think the short answer is no, usually no. They're a mixed bag. I mean, I think the Watergate investigation is the gold standard and ultimately resulted in Nixon's resignation. Now, political and just social factors were different back then. And I asked Carl Bernstein, who I talked to for the book, how did he survive so long? Like, he made it 10 months after the Saturday Night Massacre happened. And Carl basically said, first of all, pre-Nixon and up to Nixon squandered a lot of this, but people sort of more or less trusted the president. And also, Carl said things just moved more slowly back then. It wasn't this lightning pace of everything. So that's number one. That one, I think, is the gold standard. There are others that have achieved more or less their ends. I think the Scooter Libby, the investigation of the leak, the CIA leak, was more or less successful. But, it's hard to evaluate. It's not like, well, that team won the Super Bowl, so they're champions. There's always much more mixed results. I think there are some that were unequivocally disasters. Durham is one of them. I think the Hunter Biden case was ridiculous. A lot of, obviously the Clinton case has not aged well. It was not super popular at the time, and I think it's aged even more poorly now. But I think the Robert Hur case on Joe Biden came out more or less the right result. I think the Scooter Libby investigation came out more or less accurate and fair. I think Iran-Contra, up until we got to the pardons, I think was on the right track, but then that was derailed by pardons issued by George H.W. Bush. So it's decidedly a mixed record. It's not an especially satisfying record. It's not like you're watching Hoosiers and they hit the championship shot at the end and they all celebrate.
Now, aside from Trump's clown show at the DOJ, how have the roles and protections of special counsels changed since Watergate?
Yeah. So when we had the post-Watergate, that independent counsel era, that 70s to 90s stretch, it was actually an odd structure. The independent counsel was sort of under the attorney general. Janet Reno, most famously, had to sort of supervise Ken Starr, but he had a lot of his own rope there. But it was also under the courts, which is a bizarre structure that ended up getting challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was okay. Now, our current special counsel is a creation not of a statute, not of a law passed by Congress, but of the Justice Department's own regulations. And so the Justice Department can change those pretty much unilaterally, pretty quickly. And I argue at the end, it's time. There's things that we need to update. But now it's entirely within DOJ. There's this constant tension between you want an independent outside prosecutor who can do what he thinks is right without having to be, report up to an extent to the AG, but certainly to the political actors. But you also don't want a completely unaccountable runaway prosecutor. There has to be some guardrails. And so the special counsel regulations try to strike that balance. I think they overall did a good-ish job at that, but I think they can be improved.
And I know this is a subject that you're very passionate about. How poorly a job did Attorney General Merrick Garland do in the Trump cases?
Yeah, I think, Andy, I'm sure there's clips of you and me talking in 2021 and 2022, and me saying, which I wrote in my last book, which came out in 2022. I wrote it in 2022. It came out January 23, which is it's already too late. Merrick Garland wasted about 2 years before he appointed Jack Smith. The first sentence of the Jack Smith chapter reads, Jack Smith never had a chance. And as I've said to you many times, Andy, there was no way Jack Smith was going to be able to get those cases investigated, indicted, get through which we knew was coming, the immunity appeal, and try these cases before the 2024 election. And even back then, there was always a roughly 50-50 chance that Trump would win. And we all knew if Trump would won, then these cases would die. And, there was this strange debate for a while where some people were saying, well, Garland knows what he's doing. He's really sort of a secret assassin and don't take him lightly. And other people who were real prosecutors and I were saying, no, we'd be able to tell. There would be subpoenas flying. We would know this. And now there's reporting that I quote in the book from every major outlet, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, that Garland, you weren't even allowed, one of the reports said you weren't even allowed to say the name Trump in front of Garland for the first year and change when he was there. Garland just wanted no part of this fight. And why he acted too late, I think we'll never have a definitive answer. My theory is he knew that a fight with Trump would be especially ugly politically and otherwise. He was hoping he could just say, well, we started at the bottom and worked our way up, and this is where the facts and the law took us, and we got a bunch of oath keepers. Isn't that great? But it didn't take us beyond that. But there was never any way that the people who stormed the Capitol were going to be directly linked to Donald Trump. And that is bullcrap. This idea that we start at the bottom. No, you don't. Real prosecutors would tell. Andrew Weissman, who I don't always agree with, has said the same thing. We were both prosecutors here in New York, federal prosecutors. If you have a shot at a boss or a CEO or a captain in the mob, you go right at it. You don't go, well, hold on. I think I have good evidence on this boss of the Genovese family, this CEO of a major corporation, but let me stop and go down to the little fish and build. No, you go right at the top. So that was bogus by Merrick Garland, and I think he bears a lot of blame.
I think you're probably right in large part, and it's a very calculating strategy, if that's the case, on his part. But there's also a part of me that just feels like he was an old school mentality.
Yes.
Who didn't understand how to play in the new schoolyard of toxic partisanship.
I think that's right. I think he's very cautious. Institutionalist is the word that gets used for Robert Mueller as well. Very sort of protective of, the president's prerogatives. And, we can never prove this, but I would bet that in his heart of hearts, Merrick Garland was always hoping he would never have to indict Donald Trump one way or another. Something would happen and he would not have to do that. And, it's interesting. Mueller, I think, was similar. And there's a contrast drawn in the book, and people can decide which one is better or worse. And some of the lawyers that I talked about drew this contrast between the Mueller-style institutionalists, moving slowly and making sure to step carefully around executive privilege and not stating that there was a crime of obstruction when clearly that's what he concluded, right? He did the whole, if I could clear him, I would, but I can't dance, versus Jack Smith, who was described by several people. And sometimes it was meant as a compliment, and sometimes it was meant as not a compliment, as a heat-seeking missile. And so, Jack Smith approached his job the way I approached my job as a prosecutor, which is like, there's my target. I'm convinced he committed a crime. That's it. I'm taking him down. And, Trump's lawyers, not surprisingly, criticize that. They say that his approach actually really sort of spurred on their political campaign. But there are others who defend that. But, even Abby Lowell, who is a Democrat, he hasn't only represented Democrats, but by and large, he represents Letitia James right now. He represented Hunter Biden. He represents Lisa Cook, the Fed governor. He represented John Edwards. And I said to him, well, Abby, you had a case. Jack Smith was the supervisor of the John Edwards prosecution. And Abby said to me, look, I have a lot of respect for the guy, but he's a heat-seeking missile. I think that was Abby's exact words. So you could say that's a good thing. You could say that's a bad thing. Trump's team said we couldn't have been any luckier if we had Darth Vader prosecuting us in terms of reinvigorating our campaign. So, that goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a bit about the inappropriate relationship between Trump and Pam Bondi.
Politically.
But there was that presser a couple of weeks ago where he's like, look how beautiful she is. Like, what is happening right now? He was literally flirting with his attorney general on national TV. But there's also been other very close, loyal relationships between presidents and attorney generals, like Barack
Sure.
Obama and Eric Holder. And, JFK appointed his own brother, Bobby, as attorney general. Like, that couldn't have been very clean.
This is the tension, right? Because you always want someone as president who's not going to hurt you, but you also want someone who's going to be credible. I always felt like Eric Holder, I know Eric Holder said, I'm his wingman. And that's what when I wrote the Barr book, everyone's like, where's your book about Eric Holder called Wingman? Right. But that's, okay, he did say that. That was stupid. That was wrong. Eric Holder, I think, has since said, I shouldn't have said that. But look at Eric Holder's actions. I'm not saying everything he did was absolutely perfect. I know Eric Holder a little bit. I respect him. But it's no comparison between an offhanded comment that was stupid versus what Bill Barr did over 2 years and completely protected the president versus what Pam Bondi is doing now. You know who's such an interesting character in this book and someone I admire so deeply is Janet Reno. I mean, Bill Clinton was famously, like, I'm not breaking this story, but Bill Clinton famously was tearing his hair out that he had appointed this person she was with him all 8 years, and she was so fiercely independent. But I do think Janet Reno, who probably the attorney general I admire most over history, she made a mistake, I think, because there's this key moment where Ken Starr so for 4 years, Ken Starr had only been doing Whitewater, the financial, the land deals and all that. And he had nothing on, he had no shot on Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton. David Kendall, who was Bill Clinton's lawyer, said he was just hanging on for dear life. And then suddenly Monica falls out of the sky. And but there's a moment where Ken Starr needs permission because he's been appointed independent counsel to investigate Whitewater. And he understands that Monica is outside of that, right? The perjury and stuff around Monica. He goes to Janet Reno and requests permission for that. And she approves it. She has to bring it to these judges, but she approves it. And she also approves him taking the case. She didn't have to put him on it. And so I suspect Janet Reno strongly, regretted doing that. And it is notable that when that independent counsel law expired in 1999, Janet Reno, as the attorney general, testified in Congress that she thought it should go. She thought it was not well put together. And so, but look, I think Janet Reno, someone once said to me, a good friend of mine who was sort of in the mix for could this person be the next AG a couple of years ago, said to me, I have a Janet Reno problem, meaning I'm probably perceived as too actually independent. I won't say whether it was Trump or Biden era, but it was, it was somebody who, I don't know that we'll ever see another Janet Reno and Pam Bondi. It's funny because they're both from Florida. They both have similar backgrounds. They both came up as state prosecutors in Florida, but they are opposite ends of the spectrum completely.
I've always been fascinated by the Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy relationship.
Yeah. Well, that gave us the anti-nepotism rules, right? Because of that, we have these rules. Yeah.
Right. But it makes you wonder, everybody, myself included, we're all obsessed with Trump and Bondi and that inappropriateness. But it makes you wonder, like, if Bobby had uncovered something that was really, incriminating against his brother, would he have made it public, or did he squash some of that stuff and we'll never know?
I love that hypothetical. I mean, gosh knows. I mean, if it was my brother, I would probably squash it. I don't know. I would probably appoint, you know what I would have done if it was the 60s and it happened? I would have appointed an outside prosecutor, right?
I mean, knowing that family, like how we come to know them over the decades.
Yeah.
I think there would have been very fierce loyalty and maybe
we may never know.
Cover up of, in researching and writing the book, was there something that was really surprising to you that you learned?
One of the most surprising things was that I interviewed a guy named Saul Weisenberg, who is Ken Starr's number 2. Ken Starr passed away a couple of years ago. And I talked to people on Clinton's team, and there has been a long simmering debate about 2 things. One is, did Ken Starr's team leak? I mean, they pretty clearly did, but I don't know that anyone's ever admitted it. And so I asked, and Kendall and Lanny Brewer, who represented Clinton and the White House, have insisted for years, they leaked all the time. I said to Saul Weisenberg, this is in the book, I said straight up, I'm just going to ask you, did your team leak? And I was expecting the old, like, we don't know, it might have been the FBI, but he goes, oh, heck yes, we did. And I hated it. And there were 2 guys who were doing it in particular. And we told them they had to take a lie detector test and they quit instead. And now to this day, they say, oh, the reason was because we objected to what Ken Starr was doing. So that was an interesting admission. The other admission was there's been obviously a long simmering controversy about, did Ken Starr put too much detail about sex in his, his massive Starr report, which was, by the way, like this runaway bestseller. And so, you know what Ken Starr's team's defense is. And this Saul Weisenberg was very much, he still believes in what they did at Starr's team. But the defense, which is what Weisenberg said to me, was, look, this was a perjury allegation. Bill Clinton had been given a very specific definition of sexual relations, these body parts, this list of body parts. And so it was relevant whether he touched her here or there or there. And I said, okay, Saul, but twice in the Mueller report, you guys wrote that part of everyone, if you have a kid in the room, put headphones on them right now. After his sexual encounters with Monica, Bill Clinton masturbated into the Oval Office private sink. Would that have had anything to do with perjury? And Saul said, yeah, I guess not that. So I was like, okay, so finally, like someone from Starr's team, 25 years or more than 20, 26 years later has admitted that they might have gone a little too far.
Just a little. Yeah. People read a lot of books. What do you hope they take away from this one most?
I hope that people understand, first of all, that some of what and I'm going to exclude Trump 2.0 from this, but a lot of what we've seen in recent years is not new. I mean, if you go back to those ancient cases I talked about, even, Truman and Grant and those guys were undermining their prosecutors or obstructing. I'm not saying it makes it okay. Phrases like witch hunt and all that, those go back before Trump, and so, Bill Clinton himself didn't use the phrase, but people around Bill Clinton said the same thing. They said the phrase witch hunt back when. That's not to say it's all okay, but the number one thing I want people to take away is the collapse, the destruction, Trump's refusal to use special counsel in any kind of way should not stand. And really who I'm pitching this to is the 48th president, whoever that may be. And when that person comes into office, they're going to find that a lot of guardrails have been kicked down. And it's going to be tempting for them to leave them down, right? What president wants inspectors general or restrictions on private income or that kind of thing? This is one that I argue has to be brought back. It's too important. It serves too important a function. And the very last person I think I quote in the book is Archibald Cox, who was, of course, fired and this hero. And I getting into some of these people's backgrounds is unbelievable. Archie Cox is a true hero. And he says something like, history has shown us that whenever you get into these, I'm not going to say it as beautifully as him, but whenever you get into these cases involving the president or the people around him, you have to reach for an outsider. There's no other way to do this credibly in a way the public will believe in. And so, although he said this shortly after he was fired. So he said, look, this is a guy who just got fired by Richard Nixon. And he says, this institution is too important.
In our last few minutes, we've had a spate of major rulings coming out of the Supreme Court and the lower courts in the last week, 2 weeks.
Yep.
In particular, there was a major Supreme Court victory that they handed Trump, which lifted restrictions on immigration raids in L.A. How concerning is this to you and why?
Yeah, so that was I was asked on air, what was the reasoning for that decision you're talking about? So, and I said, well, we don't really know because the opinion itself is 4 sentences long and it's all procedural. Justice Kavanaugh then wrote a longer concurrence. So what was happening is ICE agents in California were stopping people based on a few factors, based on if they were speaking Spanish, their apparent ethnicity, which is another way of saying skin color, and where they were, if they were at car washes or, working at a Home Depot. And the argument was, well, that gives us reasonable suspicion. Screams out to me a Fourth Amendment violation. I mean, it's discriminatory in ways that we don't usually allow. And it was a 6-3. The 6 conservatives said, no, they can continue to do that. Like I said, there's officially no opinion on it other than the 4 sentences. But Kavanaugh says, well, it's reasonable suspicion. They're allowed to look at the totality of the circumstances. That's okay. I forget which of the liberal justices, I think it was Sotomayor, wrote the dissent and basically said, like, what are we doing here? We are overtly allowing discrimination based on skin color, based on language, based on ethnicity. And we are allowing people to be seized, not necessarily arrested, but at least stopped and questioned and, in many cases then arrested based on these impermissible factors. I'm glad you focused on that case, Andy, because there's been so many of them. and some are bigger than others. And this one's sort of, I don't know, maybe it's because when it came out or something, but it sort of slid a little bit under the radar. And I think it's a really important one.
And in a district court case, a judge ruled that Trump can't fire Fed Board Governor Lisa Cook. This is a huge loss for Trump, but the case isn't quite over yet, is it?
Yeah, I don't know that that one's going to stand. It certainly will go to the Court of Appeals. It may go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The basis of the district court's ruling is not that, well, Lisa Cook didn't do anything bad. It's that, and they don't get into, the judge does not get into that. It's that it can only be for cause, which is the legal standard, if it happened while she was on the job. I don't know that that's support. I mean, think about it logically. What if, hypothetically, you had a federal board governor and it turned out that a year before he took office, he was running a Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, right? You would say that person, that's a for-cause reason to get rid of this person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Lisa Cook is alleged to have done is, if true, is mortgage fraud. I do think that bears on her ability to serve in a way the public will believe in as a Fed board governor. But again, like back to DOJ's retribution, what happened days later, they launched yet another criminal investigation of her. So there's a lot we don't know. I do think some of the things that have been alleged against her are definitely more serious than the mortgage fraud allegations against Letitia James and Adam Schiff. If I had to guess, I'm not super confident in this, but I would guess that the courts ultimately do allow Trump to fire Lisa Cook.
And the lower courts also ruled against Trump on his termination of FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, his National Guard deployment in L.A., his use of the Alien Enemies Act regarding deportations.
I have a piece up with New York Magazine right now, and the title of it is something like Trump's emergency summer yields to fallback fall. So all these Alien Enemies Act, all these emergencies, the courts are starting to say, oh, hang on, that doesn't, yeah.
Right. But he also lost on the cuts to Harvard research funding, the legality of his tariff policies. Is there anything significant in particular about these rulings that stand out to you? And are they all headed, as expected, to the Supreme Court eventually, where he may get his victories?
Well, I think this is the courts pushing back in a meaningful way and drawing lines, and when really no one else will or can, right? I mean, sure as heck is not going to come from DOJ, as we discussed. It's not going to come from Congress right now. And, they do matter. These decisions do matter. We know the Supreme Court will hear the tariff case, by the way. And I think they're going to agree with the lower courts and strike down the tariffs. I think even the conservatives have, I won't get too deep into the theory of it, but have espoused theories that would show that Congress has not given Trump, they've not delegated the authority to Trump to issue this type of tariffs. I think Trump's going to lose on the tariffs. And people go, oh, it's the lower court cases. What does it matter? But the thing is, the Supreme Court's not going to take all of these cases. And if they don't, then the Court of Appeals ruling is the one that wins. So this stuff does matter. And I think the most meaningful source of pushback and limit drawing on Donald Trump right now is coming from the federal courts. And look, I'm not unapologetically praising of the federal courts at all times, but I think right now, generally, they're doing their jobs well.
Yeah, but with regard specifically to tariffs, and with this Republican Congress, won't they, if the Supreme Court eventually does uphold the lower court ruling, won't they just simply pass a law that says we give him the authority to do this?
Clearly, Congress can. Yeah, clearly, Congress can do that. They can constitutionally say we Congress hold the tariff power, and we hereby delegate that power to him. They can specify how broadly. Maybe they'll do that. I mean, it would, be subject to all the whims of Congress, and I guess maybe the filibuster rule in the Senate where you need 60. But that could be a response. I almost wonder if in his heart of hearts, Trump doesn't want to win the tariff case, because I think, the tariffs have proven to be so disruptive, at least, to the economy. And I've seen, look, I was on the other night on CNN with Kevin O'Leary, the investor from Shark Tank, and he's very much pro-Trump, but even he was like, hands off the Fed and hands off, like he doesn't like Trump interfering in the economic and financial world.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, and I think it also would feed his narrative to the base that look, the courts are doing this to us again. They're so rigged. So I think it would be a win-win.
And then everything bad that happens from there on out, you can go, well, if they let me do my tariffs, we would have been fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Elie, congrats again on the book. The title again is When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President, from Nixon.
Hang on.
What?
Sorry, I cut you off, but there you go. Go ahead.
All right. What a shameless promoter. There you can see the title, When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President, from Nixon to Trump. And it's coming out again this coming Tuesday, September 16th. As always, Great conversation. Come back again soon.
Thanks, Andy. Love being with you.
Alrighty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.